in the heart of a small village nestled at the edge of a vast, ancient forest. Life moved at a pace dictated by the rhythm of nature. The village was a tranquil haven, where the sounds of chirping birds and the rustling of leaves filled the air. A peaceful harmony between the natural world and human life. It was a place where the forest and the village were intertwined, each one dependent on the other, their fates forever connected. Among the villagers, there was one woman who was known and loved by all. Her name was Annika, and she was a healer. A wise woman whose knowledge of herbs and natural remedies had been passed down through generations. Annika was not only revered for her ability to cure ailments and ease suffering, but also for the deep connection she had with the forest. It was in the dense woods surrounding the village that Annika felt most at home. The forest was her sanctuary, her teacher, and her constant companion. Annika's days began early. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees and bathed the earth in a soft, golden glow, she would rise from her small, humble cottage, a simple wooden structure adorned with creeping ivy and wildflowers, and make her way into the forest. The air was crisp and cool in the mornings, and the scent of pine and earth filled her lungs as she walked along the well-worn path that led deep into the heart of the woods. For Annika, the forest was not just a place to gather herbs, though it provided her with the plants she used in her healing work. It was a sacred space, a place where she felt the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, where the whispers of the wind seemed to speak directly to her soul. She had learned from her grandmother, who had passed down the knowledge of the plants and their healing properties. Annika knew the forest like the back of her hand. Each tree, each flower, each herb had its place in the intricate tapestry of life that flourished in the woods. As she walked through the forest, Annika's senses were alert to the subtle changes around her. The way the leaves rustled in the breeze, the distant call of a bird, the soft crunch of the earth beneath her boots. These small details were all part of the symphony of life that she had come to cherish. She would stop occasionally to examine a plant, her fingers brushing over its leaves and stems, feeling its energy, sensing whether it was ready to be harvested. Some plants she gathered for their medicinal properties, others for their spiritual significance, and some simply for their beauty. Annika had learned long ago that the forest was not just a resource, it was a living entity. And she treated it with the utmost respect. She never took more than she needed, and she always gave thanks for the gifts the forest provided. It was a delicate balance, one that she understood deeply. The forest had taught her the value of patience and the importance of listening, not just to the sounds of nature, but to the quiet voice within herself. One morning, as the first rays of the sun pierced through the thick canopy above, Annika set off into the forest to collect herbs for a remedy she was preparing for an elderly villager suffering from joint pain. The forest was alive with the sounds of morning, the chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. As she walked, Annika noticed a familiar scent in the air, the earthy, pungent fragrance of wild garlic, which grew abundantly in the shady spots near the stream. She knelt down to gather the plant, carefully selecting the freshest leaves, and placing them gently into the basket she carried. As she worked, her mind wandered to the simple yet profound connection she felt with the land. The forest had been her teacher, her guide, and her healer for as long as she could remember. She had been raised on the knowledge passed down by her grandmother, who had taught her to read the land, to understand the cycles of nature, and to respect the delicate balance between humans and the earth. Annika believed that every plant, every stone, and every animal had a role to play in the world, and it was her job to honor that balance by living in harmony with the natural world. She walked deeper into the forest, her mind drifting as she searched for more herbs. She had learned to trust her intuition, allowing herself to be guided by the whispers of the trees and the rustling of the leaves. Today, however, something felt different. There was a strange stillness in the air, an almost palpable sense of anticipation. The usual bustle of the forest seemed muted, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Annika paused, sensing that something important was about to unfold. She had spent enough time in the forest to know when something unusual was happening. But what it was, she couldn't yet tell. It wasn't long before she noticed the source of the strange energy. Up ahead, a small clearing opened before her, and in the center of the clearing stood a large, ancient oak tree. The oak was a sacred tree in the village, revered for its wisdom and strength, and it was said that the tree had stood there for centuries, watching over the land. As Annika approached the oak, she noticed something she had never seen before, a small bundle of fur at its base. She bent down, her heart skipping a beat as she saw the tiny creature before her. It was a young deer, its eyes wide with fear, its leg injured. Annika's heart went out to the creature. She had been trained to help both humans and animals, and she knew that this deer, though wild, needed her help. She knelt down beside it, speaking softly, her voice calm and soothing. The deer, though frightened, seemed to sense that she meant no harm. Slowly, Annika reached out to gently examine the injured leg. It was a deep wound, but it was not beyond her ability to heal. She reached into her basket and pulled out a bundle of dried herbs, mixing them with a little water to make a poultice. As she applied the poultice to the deer's leg, Annika felt a sense of peace settle over her. The forest had brought her this creature to care for, and in that moment, she felt the profound connection between all living things. It wasn't just about healing the wound on the deer's leg, it was about healing the bond between humanity and the natural world. A bond that had been forged over centuries of mutual respect. The deer, now calm, allowed Annika to finish her work. She watched as it slowly stood up, testing its injured leg. It seemed to move with more ease, and Annika smiled, knowing that she had helped it on its way. She stood up and watched as the deer, after a moment's hesitation, bounded off into the forest, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Annika stood there for a long moment, watching the clearing where the deer had been. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the opportunity to help, but for the reminder of the interconnectedness of all life. The forest had given her a gift that day, one that reminded her of why she had chosen this life. She wasn't just a healer of bodies. She was a healer of souls. A keeper of the ancient bond between humans and the land. As she continued on her way, gathering more herbs for the elderly villager, Annika felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that her work was far from over, that there would always be more people to help, more plants to gather, and more creatures to care for. But as she walked through the forest, her heart light, her spirit grounded, she knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Living in harmony with nature, learning from the land, and sharing its gifts with those in need, this was her calling. And she would continue to answer it for as long as she walked this earth. The sun had risen higher in the sky, casting dappled light across the forest floor as Annika made her way back to the village. The village, with its simple cottages and friendly faces, was waiting for her, and though the world beyond the forest was full of challenges and changes, Annika knew that as long as she had the forest by her side, she would always find her way home. It was an ordinary morning when the earth beneath Annika's feet trembled, the ground quivering ever so slightly. The soft, rhythmic hum of the forest was interrupted by a subtle vibration, something familiar but unnerving. Annika paused in her work, a hand on her shovel as she glanced up at the treetops. The leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, but something felt off. The birds had stopped singing, the wind stilling for a moment. The air was heavy, thick with anticipation. The tremor was brief, but it was enough to unsettle the peace of the morning. It felt like a whisper from the earth, an ancient reminder of nature's power. Annika shook it off, returning to her work in the small garden behind her cottage. She bent down to inspect the plants, her fingers brushing over the leaves of a lavender bush she had carefully cultivated. The scent of fresh herbs filled the air, calming her nerves. Life in the village was simple, and she had always felt safe, surrounded by the beauty and tranquility of the land. But the peace was soon shattered. The ground shook again, this time with more force. A deep, rumbling sound echoed from the direction of the forest, a noise that seemed to reverberate through the very air. Annika stood up, her heart racing. The tremor was more violent this time, and the trees in the forest began to sway. Before she could react, the earth beneath her feet seemed to shift, and a deafening crash rang out in the distance. A landslide had begun. The sound of the landslide was like the roar of thunder, followed by the crashing of trees, rocks, and debris tumbling down the mountainside. Annika's breath caught in her throat as she watched, helpless, from the edge of the garden. The forest that had once been so full of life, so vibrant and calm, was now being ripped apart. The trees falling like giant dominoes. Dust and dirt rose into the air, swirling in the wind. The village was not in immediate danger, but the forest was being torn asunder. It was a chaotic, terrifying spectacle that filled Annika with dread. She knew the forest like the back of her hand, and her first thought was for the creatures that lived there. The landslide was not just a force of nature, it was a danger to the wildlife that called this place home. Annika quickly grabbed her satchel and ran toward the forest, her heart pounding with fear. She had to help, to see if any animals were trapped or injured. She knew the dangers, but the need to help, to protect, drove her forward. The damage was severe. As she reached the edge of the forest, Annika saw trees uprooted, their massive trunks lying across the ground like fallen soldiers. Rocks had been dislodged from the mountainside, and the forest floor was covered in debris. Annika carefully made her way through the wreckage, calling out softly, hoping to hear the sounds of animals, the reassuring rustle of leaves or the chirp of birds. But the forest was eerily silent. Then, she heard it, a low, guttural growl, filled with pain and desperation. Annika froze, her heart skipping a beat. The growl was unmistakable. It was the sound of a lion. She followed the sound, her legs moving faster now, her breath coming in quick bursts. Her heart was in her throat as she made her way deeper into the forest. Navigating through the destruction, the growl became louder, more urgent, and soon she saw the source of the sound, a large male lion. Trapped beneath the massive weight of a fallen tree, the lion's body was crushed, its once proud mane matted with dirt and blood. It groaned, its amber eyes filled with pain as it tried to lift its head. But the weight of the tree was too much. Annika's heart broke as she saw the mighty creature, once the ruler of the forest, now lying helpless. She knew the lion was gravely injured. But there was no time to waste. She rushed forward, her hands shaking as she examined the fallen tree. It was large, and she knew it would take all of her strength just to move it, let alone lift it enough to free the lion. But she also knew she had no choice. She had to try. Just as Annika began to pull at the tree, a sudden movement caught her eye. A lioness, equally majestic and powerful, stepped out from behind the brush. Her eyes locked onto Annika, and there was no mistaking the emotion in him: desperation, fear, and a plea for help. The lioness was frantic, pacing back and forth as she looked at the injured male, her mate. She had clearly been trying to help him. But now, as the destruction of the landslide had separated them from the safety of the forest, she too was trapped. The lioness let out a sorrowful cry, and Annika's heart twisted. The bond between these two creatures was undeniable. The lioness was not just mourning. She was terrified for her mate's life. Annika looked back at the injured male and realized that she couldn't move the tree alone. But she had to do something. The lioness was pacing now, her movements erratic. Annika spoke softly to her, trying to calm the frantic creature. But the lioness did not respond. Instead, she growled, a warning sound that sent a chill through Annika. It was clear that the lioness was not going to let anyone near her mate. She was in full protective mode, ready to defend him at all costs. Annika paused, unsure of what to do. She had never encountered a situation like this before, where two wild creatures were in such distress. And she was the only one who could help. The situation was delicate. The lioness, though she was desperate for help, was still a wild animal, and she could be dangerous. But as Annika stood there, unsure of her next move, the lioness's eyes softened. There was a moment of understanding between them, a silent communication that passed between the two. The lioness stepped back, giving Annika space, and the moment she did, Annika knew what she had to do. She didn't have much time. The male lion was growing weaker by the moment. His growls now quieter, his body trembling under the weight of the tree. Annika knelt beside the lioness, speaking in calming tones as she began to assess the situation. She knew she had to find a way to remove the tree, to free the male lion. But it wasn't going to be easy. She looked around the wreckage, searching for something she could use to leverage the tree. The lioness remained by her side, her eyes fixed on Annika as if waiting for her to do something. Anything. And then, as if guided by the forest itself, Annika spotted something, a large branch, strong enough to use as a lever. She wasted no time in grabbing it, her muscles straining as she positioned it beneath the fallen tree. With a grunt of effort, Annika pushed with all her strength. Slowly, inch by inch, the tree began to lift. The lioness, sensing the shift in the situation, stepped forward cautiously. She watched Annika's every move, her eyes locked onto the healer. And as the tree finally moved enough for the male lion to free himself, the lioness let out a low, rumbling growl, a sound that seemed to express gratitude and relief. The male lion, now free, staggered to his feet, his body still weak from the injury but determined to stand. He looked at Annika with exhausted, grateful eyes before turning to his mate. The two lions, now free of the tree's crushing weight, shared a quiet, powerful moment. Their bond was undeniable, and Annika knew that she had helped save more than just their lives. She had helped preserve the sacred balance between humans and the wild. The lioness nuzzled the male lion gently before turning to leave, her movements slow and deliberate as she guided him back toward the forest. Annika watched them go, her heart swelling with a quiet sense of pride. She had done what she could, and it had been enough. The two lions, though they would face challenges ahead, were safe for now. As Annika stood there, watching the lions disappear into the shadows of the forest, she felt a deep connection to the land and its creatures. The forest had given her the opportunity to help, and in doing so, she had been reminded of the delicate, precious balance that existed between humans and the natural world. It was a reminder that, no matter how much time passed, no matter how far away from nature one might feel, the wild would always be there, waiting to teach its lessons, waiting for those brave enough to listen. The village would soon hear of what had happened that day, the story of the healer who had helped save the lives of the lions. It would be told and retold, a testament to the bond that could exist between humans and the creatures of the wild. But for Annika, it was simply another day in the life of someone who had chosen to live in harmony with nature. It was a day when she had been able to give back to the land that had given her so much. It was an ordinary morning in the village. A peaceful scene that Annika had grown accustomed to. The sun had just risen, casting its soft, golden light over the land, and the air was fresh with the scent of earth and flowers. Annika had already spent several hours in her garden, tending to the plants and herbs that she relied on for her healing work. The garden was her sanctuary, a place where she could feel connected to the earth and its cycles. A place where she could recharge and find peace after the busy days spent helping others in the village. as she bent down to prune the lavender bushes. Annika suddenly felt an unusual shift in the air. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and an instinctual chill ran down her spine. She paused, her heart racing, her breath catching in her throat. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. A quiet warning that something out of the ordinary was about to unfold. Looking up from the garden, Annika scanned the surroundings, her eyes searching for the source of the strange feeling. At first, all she saw were the familiar trees and the gently swaying grass. The idyllic landscape that had always brought her comfort. But then, at the edge of her garden, just beyond the wooden gate, something moved, something large. Her heart skipped a beat. Annika stood still, her body frozen in place as she watched the figure approach. There, at the gate of her cottage, stood a lioness. Her golden fur shone under the sunlight, her powerful frame and elegant movements striking. But what was most remarkable was the expression in her eyes, intelligent, filled with a quiet desperation, but not hostile. The lioness was not approaching with aggression. She was simply standing there, her body relaxed but alert, her gaze locked on Annika. Annika's mind raced, her thoughts a jumble of conflicting emotions. She had always known that the forest and its creatures were a part of her world. But never had she imagined a moment like this. The lioness, a creature of the wild, was standing at her door, staring at her with eyes that seemed to ask for something. It was as if the animal had come with a purpose, and Annika felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility stir within her. Though the lioness was a symbol of strength and power, there was no sign of threat in her posture. She was not growling or showing her teeth. Instead, she stood motionless, her amber eyes fixed on Annika with an almost pleading expression. For a moment, the world seemed to still. The sound of birds chirping, the rustling of the leaves, and the hum of the wind all faded into the background, leaving only the powerful presence of the lioness. Annika's mind raced with questions. Why was this majestic creature here? What did she want? Was she injured? Or was there something more to this encounter than met the eye? Despite the fear that gnawed at her, Annika knew deep down that this was not an ordinary meeting. There was something profound about this moment, something beyond the simple existence of a wild animal on her doorstep. Slowly, Annika took a step forward. Her heart was pounding, her legs trembling. But she couldn't back away. The lioness had come to her for a reason, and she couldn't ignore it. She knew the importance of listening to the land, of understanding the messages that nature sent. This encounter, this moment, was something that she could not dismiss. As Annika moved closer, she spoke softly, her voice calm and steady, despite the fear bubbling up inside her. "It's all right," she said gently, as though trying to reassure the lioness. "I won't harm you." The lioness did not flinch or growl. She simply stood there, her eyes never leaving Annika's face. The tension between them was palpable, but it was not one of fear. It was the tension of mutual understanding, of an unspoken connection. Annika could feel the weight of the lioness's gaze, as if the creature was communicating something deeper, something urgent. As Annika continued to move closer, The lioness made no attempt to retreat. Instead, she stepped slightly to the side, as though inviting Annika to come closer. Annika felt a strange surge of determination. Whatever this was, it was important. The lioness was not here to threaten her. No, this was a plea for help. Annika's heart swelled with compassion, and she knew that she had to act. The lioness took a few steps backward, then turned her head toward the dense forest beyond the garden. She looked back at Annika, then back to the forest. A silent signal of urgency. Annika's eyes followed the direction the lioness was indicating. The forest, once a peaceful and harmonious place, now seemed foreboding, darkened by the shadows of the trees and the weight of the situation. The lioness's actions were clear. There was something in the forest. Something that required help. Something that needed her. Without a second thought, Annika took a deep breath and nodded. She understood now. The lioness had come to her for assistance. And the forest, the land she had spent so much of her life in, had called for her. The balance of nature was fragile. And sometimes, the call for help came from the wild itself. Annika turned back toward her cottage, quickly grabbing a pouch of herbs and a few tools from the shelves. She knew she would need them. The lioness had not come here by chance. Whatever lay ahead, whatever had drawn the lioness to her, was something that Annika had to face. With the pouch securely fastened to her waist and the tools ready, Annika stepped out of the gate and into the open space in front of her cottage. The lioness was waiting, her head slightly tilted as she looked at Annika with those same pleading eyes. Annika knew that this was the beginning of something profound. Something that would change her forever. She had been called to the wild, and she would not turn away. The lioness turned, moving gracefully through the tall grass, and Annika followed, her heart beating faster with every step. The forest loomed ahead, the trees casting long shadows as they entered its embrace. The cool shade was a relief from the bright sunlight. But Annika felt a growing sense of urgency. The lioness moved with purpose, her powerful legs carrying her through the underbrush as she led Annika deeper into the heart of the woods. Annika's thoughts raced. What had happened in the forest? Was the lioness hurt? What danger was lurking among the trees? The lioness's steady pace gave her no answers. But Annika did not falter. She trusted the forest. She trusted the animals that lived there. And she trusted the bond between herself and the wild. The journey through the forest seemed to stretch on forever, the path winding and twisting beneath the dense canopy. Annika moved steadily behind the lioness, her breath steady, her feet sure on the forest floor. Every now and then, the lioness would glance back at her, as if making sure Annika was still with her, still following. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a small clearing. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the ground. But as Annika stepped forward, her eyes widened in shock. In the center of the clearing, a large, fallen tree lay across the ground. Beneath it, a male lion was trapped. His body was pinned by the weight of the massive tree, and his eyes were filled with pain and exhaustion. The lioness stood beside him, her body tense with worry as she looked to Annika for help. Annika's heart sank. The male lion, once a powerful and regal creature, was now vulnerable, helpless, and in desperate need of assistance. The lioness's plea had been clear: her mate was in need. And only Annika could help. Without hesitation, Annika rushed forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The male lion's condition was grave. But she knew she had to act quickly. She knelt beside him, carefully assessing the situation. The tree was massive, and moving it would take all her strength. But she had no choice. The lioness stood nearby, watching with a mixture of hope and fear in her eyes. Annika knew the stakes were high. This was not just a matter of survival for the male lion, it was a test of her bond with the forest. With the wild, she had been called upon. And now she had to do everything in her power to help. As she worked, the lioness remained by her side, offering silent support. Annika's hands shook with the effort. But she knew she couldn't give up. Finally, with a last push, the tree moved, just enough for the male lion to escape. He staggered to his feet. Still weak, but free, the lioness stepped forward, nuzzling her mate gently. Annika watched, her heart swelling with emotion as the two lions shared a quiet moment of relief. The forest had brought them together, and together, they would find their way forward. Annika stood back, watching the two lions disappear into the depths of the forest. Her heart was full, knowing she had helped preserve the delicate balance of nature. This was the wild, and she was a part of it. Annika stood in her garden, watching the lioness carefully, her heart racing with a mix of fear and empathy. The majestic creature had come to her for help. And Annika knew that this wasn't a simple encounter. It was a call to something deeper, an urgent plea from the wild. And she could not turn her back on it. The lioness's amber eyes, full of desperation and quiet understanding, held her gaze as if asking for trust. In that moment, Annika understood that this was her responsibility, her moment to connect with nature in a way that few ever did. She quickly grabbed her small herbal pouch, filled with the plants and remedies she used in her healing work. It wasn't much, but she knew she had to be prepared. She trusted her knowledge of nature, but there was no guarantee that it would be enough to save the male lion. Annika's heart swelled with a deep sense of duty as she fastened the pouch securely to her side. This wasn't just about healing an injured animal. It was about maintaining the fragile balance between humans and the wild. A responsibility that she had come to embrace as her calling. The lioness gave a soft whine and turned, slowly leading the way through the garden gate and into the forest. Annika followed without hesitation, her feet light on the earth. Her mind focused on the task at hand. She had spent her entire life in this land, learning from the forest and its creatures. Now, it seemed the forest itself had called her to action. As they moved through the forest, Annika noticed how the environment had changed. The usual serene sounds of the woods were replaced with an eerie silence, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional snap of a twig. The air felt heavy, charged with the tension of an impending crisis. The trees, once comforting in their towering presence, now seemed to loom over her as if watching, waiting for her next move. The lioness moved ahead, her body poised and alert, her head occasionally turning back to ensure that Annika was keeping up. Annika, in turn, kept her eyes on the lioness, trusting her to guide her to the male lion. The path was difficult. The forest, which had once seemed so welcoming, was now filled with obstacles. Fallen trees and rocks littered the ground, evidence of the destruction caused by the landslide earlier. Annika carefully navigated the debris, her heart pounding with every step, knowing that time was of the essence. The further they ventured into the forest, the more the terrain became rugged. The smell of pine and earth was thick in the air. But there was something else. Something faintly metallic, blood. Annika quickened her pace, her instincts telling her they were getting closer. The lioness seemed to sense it too, her movements becoming more urgent as she picked her way through the underbrush. Annika could see that her fur was matted with dirt, her breathing heavy, but still she led the way with quiet determination. There was no turning back now. Whatever awaited her at the end of this journey, Annika was ready to face it. Finally, after what seemed like hours of walking through the dense forest, they arrived at a small clearing. Annika's breath caught in her throat as she saw the male lion lying there, half covered by a large fallen tree. His massive form was crumpled, his golden mane dark with blood and dirt. He groaned softly, his body trembling, but he did not move otherwise. The lioness stood beside him, her body tense, her eyes never leaving Annika as if silently pleading for help. Annika's heart broke as she took in the sight of the injured lion. His once proud form was now weakened, vulnerable, and in desperate need of care. His body was pinned by the tree, and from the way he lay, it was clear that he had been struggling for some time. But there was a fire in his eyes, a flicker of strength that told Annika he wasn't ready to give up. She approached cautiously, knowing how unpredictable wild animals could be, especially in pain. She spoke softly, her voice steady but filled with compassion. "I'm here to help," she said gently, her words meant to soothe. The lion's eyes shifted toward her, and though there was pain in them, there was no aggression. He was wary, but he wasn't hostile. Annika knelt beside him, examining the injury carefully. The tree had fallen across his back and one of his legs, pinning him to the ground. There was no immediate threat to his life from the wound itself, but the pressure of the tree could cause further damage if left unrelieved. She knew that time was of the essence. If she didn't act quickly, the male lion's survival would be at risk. She pulled a small knife from her pouch and began to carefully cut away the branches and smaller debris that had accumulated around the tree. The lion watched her, his body tense, but his eyes never left her face. He was trusting her, and she could feel it in the way he responded to her movements, hesitant but willing. The lioness, seeing that Annika was making progress, stepped back slightly but stayed close, watching with a quiet intensity. Annika worked quickly, her fingers nimble despite the situation. She had learned to be swift in the face of danger, her years of practice in the field teaching her how to handle difficult and potentially dangerous situations. With a final pull, the last of the branches was cleared away. and Annika could see the full extent of the injury. The male lion's leg was badly bruised, and it appeared that one of the bones had been fractured. The wound wasn't deep, but it was serious enough to keep him immobile. Annika knew that she would need to work quickly to tend to the injury. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a bundle of dried herbs. Carefully, she began to mix them with a little water, creating a poultice that she would apply to the lion's wounds. The herbs would help with pain, inflammation, and healing, but it would take time. Annika's hands moved with precision, applying the poultice gently to the injured leg. The male lion let out a low, strained growl, clearly in pain, but he did not resist. Instead, he remained still, his eyes watching Annika closely. She could see the trust in his gaze. And despite the agony he must have been feeling, he did not lash out. There was a quiet understanding between them, a connection that transcended the barrier between species. As Annika worked, the lioness remained by her side, her presence a constant reassurance. The lioness's gaze never strayed far from her mate, but she seemed to recognize that Annika was trying to help. Her quiet observance was a reminder of the delicate balance between the wild and the human world. A reminder that, sometimes, understanding and empathy were enough to bridge the gap. Once the poultice was in place, Annika took a deep breath and stepped back. She knew that the lion would need rest and care. But for now, he had been given some relief. She turned to the lioness, her heart filled with gratitude for the silent trust they had shared. "He'll be okay," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. "But he needs time." The lioness gave a soft rumble, a sound that seemed to express both relief and gratitude. Annika smiled gently, knowing that her work was far from over. The male lion would need time to heal. But for now, he was safe. As she stood up, she looked out across the clearing, her heart swelling with a sense of peace. She had done what she could. And in that moment, she knew that she had made a difference. The two lions, now with some hope for recovery, turned and began to move slowly back toward the forest. Annika watched them go, her heart full of emotion. The wild had once again reminded her of the fragile beauty of life, the deep connection that all creatures shared. She had been called to help, and she had answered. As the lions disappeared into the shadows of the forest, Annika stood there for a moment, reflecting on the profound encounter. The forest was not just a place of survival, it was a place of mutual respect, where every living creature played a part in the delicate balance of life. And for a brief moment, Annika had been part of that balance. The days that followed Annika's encounter with the lioness and the injured male lion were filled with a quiet sense of purpose. The healing herbs she had applied had worked wonders. The lion was now moving with greater ease, though his strength had yet to fully return. Annika continued to care for him in the small clearing where they had found shelter, keeping her distance from the wild creatures that still roamed the nearby forest. The lioness, always vigilant and protective, stayed close to her mate, but she allowed Annika to approach them, to offer what care she could without disturbing the delicate balance of their world. Each day, Annika would return to the clearing, bringing with her more herbs and medicines from her small cottage, checking on the lion's recovery, and offering quiet words of encouragement. Slowly, the great creature's wounds began to heal. His once pained movements grew more fluid, and though he still seemed cautious and weary, there was a quiet sense of relief in his eyes that hadn't been there before. It was during one of these visits, as Annika carefully applied the poultice to his leg, that she realized something profound. She had been so focused on helping the lions, so consumed by the need to heal and care for them, that she hadn't truly considered the broader consequences of their presence near the village. The lions, magnificent and regal as they were wild animals, creatures of the forest, and the forest, as beautiful and powerful as it could be, was not a place meant for cohabitation with humans. The villagers lived in harmony with the land, but the presence of such dangerous creatures so close to their homes could not be ignored for long. Annika knew that the lions were not safe here. The humans who lived in the village had their own needs, their own fears, and as much as they respected the land and its creatures, there was always a tension between the wild and the domestic. The lions, though they had shown no aggression, could easily become a threat if provoked or if they grew too accustomed to human presence. The villagers would not understand the connection Annika had forged with the lions, and their presence so close to the village would eventually lead to fear, misunderstanding, and perhaps even violence. As she looked down at the male lion, his body now stronger, more confident with every passing day, Annika felt a deep, almost spiritual understanding of the situation. The balance of nature had been restored in this small clearing. But it could not stay this way. The wild had its place, just as humans did, and though her heart ached with the thought of saying goodbye to these magnificent creatures, Annika knew what had to be done. The lioness, sensing Annika's thoughts, watched her closely. There was a quiet intelligence in the lioness's gaze, an understanding that passed between them without words. She had always known that her time here with the humans was limited. She had sensed the shifting energy of the land, and her loyalty to her mate was what had brought her here. But now, as the last of the healing began to take root, it was time for them to return to the wild, to the deep forests where they truly belonged. Annika stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from her hands, and turned to face the lioness and the male lion. The two lions, their eyes locked on her, seemed to sense that their time together was coming to an end. The lioness approached her first, her powerful frame moving with the quiet grace that only a wild animal could possess. She nudged Annika's hand gently, a soft rumble emanating from her chest, a sound that seemed to express gratitude, not for the healing she had received, but for the respect and understanding Annika had shown them. The male lion, his movements slower but still strong, took a step forward as well, his amber eyes shining with a mix of appreciation and recognition. There was no growl, no hint of aggression, only a quiet, deep sense of connection. Annika's heart swelled as she looked into his eyes. She could feel the bond they had shared, the unspoken trust, and the raw, untamed beauty of their spirit. In this moment, she understood that she had done something far greater than simply helping them survive. She had restored a fragile, sacred balance, one that would not be easily broken. The lioness and the male lion turned away from her, their movements purposeful as they began to make their way back toward the forest. Annika stood still, watching them as they slowly walked deeper into the woods, their powerful bodies moving with an ease and grace that was the essence of the wild. She felt a deep sense of peace settle over her as she watched them disappear into the trees, their figures blending with the shadows of the forest. She knew this was the right decision. The lions belonged to the wild, to the vast, untamed landscape that stretched beyond the village. They had found their way back to their home, just as Annika had found her place in the world of nature. Their journey, however brief it had been in the human world, had come full circle. As she stood there, alone in the clearing, Annika felt the weight of the moment settle upon her. The forest was once again at peace. The lions had returned to their rightful place, and the balance between humans and the wild had been restored. It was a delicate balance, one that could only be maintained by respect, understanding, and a willingness to let go when the time was right. In the village, word of Annika's bravery and the healing of the lions spread quickly. The villagers, who had always respected Annika's knowledge and connection to the land, now looked at her with even greater reverence. The story of the lioness and the male lion became a symbol of the bond between humans and nature, a reminder that we are not separate from the earth, but an integral part of it. The villagers spoke of Annika with admiration, telling the tale of how she had not only healed the lions but had also shown them the respect and understanding that the wild so desperately needed. For Annika, the experience was transformative. It reminded her of the power of empathy, the importance of understanding the wild, and the deep responsibility that came with living in harmony with nature. The wild had called to her, and she had answered, but now, as the lions vanished into the depths of the forest, she knew that her connection with them would remain, not in their physical presence, but in the spirit of the forest itself. Annika returned to her garden, where the flowers bloomed in quiet harmony, and the herbs she had gathered continued to thrive. She felt at peace, knowing that she had done the right thing. The forest, the lions, and the village were all part of the same delicate web of life, and she had been fortunate enough to play a role in preserving that balance. As she worked in her garden that afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the ground, Annika felt the presence of the wild all around her. The birds, the trees, the animals, everything was connected. Everything had its place, and as the wind whispered through the leaves, Annika knew that the balance had been restored, and the wild would always be there, waiting for those who understood its call.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.